All right, today in a video, I wanted to give an overview of the first step of cellular respiration, and that step is called glycolysis. So we'll think about this step, and then in some other videos, we'll address the other steps of cellular respiration. So glycolysis. Glycolysis, the name sort of tells us what is going on. This is a step where we're really doing sugar breaking. So the beginning of this word, glycolysis, glyco, means relating to sugar. The second half of that word, lysis, refers to disintegration or breakdown. So put those two parts together, glycolysis, we're doing the breakdown of sugar. For glycolysis, we're going to be talking about one specific sugar, and that's glucose. We're going to break it apart into two pyruvate molecules. Right. The other thing I want you to know about glycolysis is that this step takes place in the cytoplasm, which is different than the other steps of cellular respiration that we're going to talk about. But we'll get to that later on. Okay, so let's look at the reactants and products of glycolysis. So glycolysis begins with a glucose molecule. Then along the way, we're going to need a couple of these ADP molecules so that we can store some energy in them. Then we're going to need a couple of these NAD+ molecules. We'll be loading electrons onto those, and this is another way of transferring energy around inside the cell. We'll do the steps of glycolysis represented by the arrow, and the products of glycolysis will be two pyruvate molecules. That's what we're going to break the glucose in half to produce, along with two ATP molecules, some energy carriers, and two of these NADH molecules. Again, energy carriers. These ones are carrying some electrons that we'll use as an energy source later on. So as a reminder, everything in front of the arrow, those are our reactants or substrates. Glucose, ADP, and NAD are the reactants. And then everything on the other side of the arrow are the products. So pyruvate, ATP, and NADH are the products of glycolysis. Just to be clear, there's a few characteristics of these molecules I want to make sure you're aware of. So these are them. I'd like you to be aware that glucose is a 6-carbon sugar. I want you to be aware that pyruvate is a 3-carbon molecule. That's why when we break glucose in half, we make two of these pyruvates. Sometimes pyruvate is called pyruvic acid. So if you see that in a book or in a presentation somewhere else, pyruvate and pyruvic acid, for our purposes, are the exact same thing. All right, then we've got the ATP and ADP molecules. Again, these are just energy carrier molecules. In the past, I've referred to ATP, ADP like a rechargeable battery, where ATP is the high energy form, the charged up battery, and ADP is the low energy form, the dead battery. All right, the last molecule in this reaction is NADH/NAD. This is an electron carrier. Okay. So the NADH form is the high energy form that's carrying some extra electrons, whereas NAD+ is the low energy form that is not carrying these extra electrons. If we understand these terms and know these facts, then we shouldn't have a lot of trouble discussing what is going on during glycolysis. All right, let's look more closely at glycolysis. So this is the overall chemical equation for glycolysis, but let's look at a more granular level. So here on the left, I'm showing you the specific chemical reaction for glycolysis. It turns out that glycolysis is a complex set of chemical reactions. There are 9 steps over there. And let's zoom in on the top half of this. We can see in the first steps that glucose starts, and we're going to do some steps. We can see enzyme names here next to the arrows, indicates which enzymes are making these steps happen. And then in the boxes are the names of the substrates and products. So the products sometimes have long, complicated names. It's true on the top half of the glycolysis reaction. It's true on the bottom as well. Again, we've got the arrows representing chemical reactions, with the enzyme names written next to the arrows. And in the boxes, we've got the names of the substrates and the products. Now, this is far too much information for us to know in this class. I want you to have a more generalized understanding of glycolysis. So we're not going to look too closely at these names in the boxes. I don't expect you to memorize them, nor do I expect you to know the chemical structures that are shown next to them. We're going to break glycolysis down into 3 simple steps. Okay? So we're going to take that complicated set of chemical reactions and we're going to think about it in 3 parts. Part 1 is going to be the top here. We're going to call that energy investment. The next step right here will be cleavage. You can see that this molecule is getting broken apart into 2 molecules, and then this molecule is getting converted into the identical shape as this other molecule. So we start with 1 glucose, and we're going to end up with 2 of these molecules in the middle because we broke glucose in half. And then the bottom steps are going to represent energy harvesting. This is where we're going to get energy out of the molecule that initially began as glucose. All right, so let's look more closely at these 3 steps. All right, so again, glycolysis is going to occur in 3 major steps. The first one is energy investment. The main thing we're going to pay attention to there is that we're going to spend 2 ATP molecules to sort of activate our glucose. That will make it participate in the following chemical reactions more readily. All right. Again, the second step is cleavage, where we're going to break our glucose molecule apart into 2 3-carbon molecules. And then the last step, 3, is energy harvesting, where we're going to produce some energy. We're going to produce 4 ATP molecules. So let's look more closely at each of these steps, one at a time. So again, step 1, energy investment. It represents the first 3 chemical reactions in glycolysis. And during any energy investment, we're going to use 2 ATP molecules to add phosphate groups to glucose. Remember, ATP contains energy. We're essentially transferring that energy from ATP to glucose. So we do that once right here with 1 ATP molecule, and then you can see the phosphate is on glucose. And then we do it again right here with a second ATP molecule. And now this glucose molecule has 2 phosphates attached to it. We have energized this molecule, making it more likely to react in the coming reactions during glycolysis. Sorry about that. Okay. Now, along the way, we also change the shape of glucose. So we actually stop calling it glucose. It actually becomes something we call fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. But that's not important. Basically, I want you to recognize that we start with glucose, we put these 2 ATP energy molecules in, and now we've got this activated or energized glucose. And that's what we'll call it, activated glucose. And we're not going to spend time memorizing fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. So that's energy investment. 2 ATPs in, the energy goes into glucose, and now our glucose is active and ready to go for the next steps. So then we can proceed to step 2. During step 2, we take our activated glucose, again, it's got this name, but activated glucose, and we're going to break it in half into 2 molecules. So we produce these 2 different molecules right here by breaking glucose in half. And then one of these molecules, we just change the shape a little bit so that it looks exactly like this molecule on the left. So we break this glucose in half, and we produce 2 of these molecules right here. They have this name, glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Again, I don't want you to memorize that name. I'm never going to ask you the specific name of that molecule. But I do want you to recognize that that molecule contains 3 carbons. So we take our activated glucose, we break it in half, and we make 2 3-carbon molecules. They're called glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. But we won't use that name again. All right, so we've gone through energy investment and cleavage. Now we need to work on these 3-carbon molecules that we have. So we'll do that in energy harvesting. So energy harvesting is going to involve 5 chemical reactions. But again, we're going to simplify this. So each of those 3-carbon molecules we just produced during cleavage, we're going to process them further, and we're going to produce 1 NADH molecule. This again is an energy carrier. We're going to produce 2 ATP molecules, again, energy carriers. And we're going to produce 1 pyruvate molecule, again, a 3-carbon molecule. So we start with this 3-carbon molecule, we do the chemical reactions, and at the end we're going to produce this pyruvate in the bottom left. Pyruvate is still a 3-carbon molecule. Along the way, we produce this NADH, an ATP, and another ATP in this last step. So, because we're doing this step twice, we have 2 3-carbon molecules that we're starting energy harvesting with. We make 1 NADH from each, so in total we're going to make 2 NADHs. We make 2 ATP from each of these 3-carbon molecules, so in total we're going to make 4 ATP molecules. And again, we started with 2 3-carbon molecules. We're going to turn them both into a pyruvate. So at the end, we're going to have 2 of these pyruvate molecules. And that's energy harvesting. The reason we call it energy harvesting is because we create these energy carriers, 2 NADH molecules and 4 ATP molecules. And that's it. Glycolysis is over. So let's again look at the overall chemical reaction of glycolysis. We started with that glucose. We invested some energy into it to activate it. We did the cleavage to break it apart into 2 3-carbon molecules. And then we harvested energy out of those 3-carbon molecules. And we made NADH and ATP. And you might be looking at this chemical equation going, wait, we just talked about how energy harvesting produces 4 ATP from those 2 3-carbon molecules. But I only have 2 ATP listed here. That's because I'm listing the net products of glycolysis. Remember that we started glycolysis by investing 2 ATP molecules. So yes, we did make 4 ATP molecules during energy harvesting, but earlier we had spent 2 ATP molecules during energy investment. So overall, glycolysis produces a total of 2 ATP molecules, along with those 2 pyruvate and the 2 NADH molecules. Right. So that's where we'll end with glycolysis. Next up, we'll talk about the Krebs cycle and later on the electron transport chain and chemiosmosis. But this is the first part of cellular respiration, and it's important for our ability to understand the steps that come next. So we'll talk about them in coming videos. As always, I hope you'll ask questions if you have any, and I will talk to you soon.